My son drove off and left me on the highway for hours. I walked in darkness, terrified and exhausted. Later, his promotion was revoked. What I did made him grovel. The taillights of Marcus's BMW disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing on the shoulder of Highway 101, with nothing but my wallet and the clothes on my back. The November wind cut through my thin jacket as trucks roared past, their headlights briefly illuminating my figure before plunging me back into darkness. "You need to learn your place, Dad," my son had said before driving off, his face twisted with a rage I'd never seen before. Those words echoed in my mind as I stood there, a 68-year-old man abandoned on a desolate stretch of highway, 50 miles from home, trying to comprehend how the boy I'd raised alone after his mother's death could leave me here like roadside trash. My name is William Chen, and this is the story of how my son's cruelty became his downfall, and how sometimes the greatest lessons come from the hardest falls. The argument that led to this moment had started 3 hours earlier when Marcus picked me up for what was supposed to be a father-son trip to inspect his new promotion property. He'd just been made regional director at his company, the youngest in the firm's history, and wanted to show off the development project he'd be overseeing. I should have known something was wrong when he barely looked at me as I got in the car, his fingers drumming impatiently on the steering wheel while I buckled my seatbelt. The drive started in silence, but as we merged onto the highway, Marcus began talking about his subordinates with a contempt that made my stomach turn. He called them lazy, incompetent, worthless, describing how he'd fired 3 people in his first week for minor infractions. When I suggested that perhaps patience and mentorship might be better leadership tools than fear, his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "What would you know about leadership, Dad?" he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You spent 40 years as a construction supervisor. You never had vision, never had ambition. You settled for mediocrity." The word stung, but what hurt more was the stranger sitting beside me wearing my son's face. I tried to remind him of the values his mother and I had taught him, about treating people with respect regardless of their position, about remembering where you came from. That's when he exploded. He pulled over to the shoulder so abruptly that my seatbelt locked, pressing hard against my chest. "Get out," he said, his voice cold and flat. I laughed, thinking it was a poor joke, but his expression didn't change. I said, "Get out. You want to lecture me about respect? You embarrass me, Dad. Your clothes, your ancient flip phone, your constant moralizing. My colleagues laugh when they find out you're my father. Jennifer's parents think you're a relic. Get out and find your own way home. Maybe a long walk will help you understand that the world has moved on without you." I sat frozen, unable to believe what I was hearing, until he reached across me and opened the door. "Get out, or I'll call the police and tell them you're having a senior moment and attacked me while I was driving." The calculation in his eyes, the casual cruelty of the threat, made me realize this wasn't my son anymore. This was someone else entirely, someone shaped by ambition and poisoned by success. I got out of the car slowly, my arthritic knee protesting as I stood on the gravel shoulder. Marcus didn't even wait for me to close the door properly before pulling away, the car door slamming shut from the acceleration. I watched those red taillights shrink into points before disappearing entirely, leaving me in a darkness so complete it felt physical. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions. No exits visible. No lights except for the occasional vehicle speeding past. I checked my phone, but Marcus was right about one thing. My ancient flip phone had no signal out here. I started walking in the direction of home, each step sending sharp pain through my knee. The same knee I'd injured years ago working overtime to pay for Marcus's college tuition. The irony wasn't lost on me as I limped along the narrow shoulder, pressing myself against the guardrail whenever a truck roared past, its wind wake nearly knocking me over. The fear hit me about a mile into my walk. Not fear of the dark or the traffic, but fear of what I'd lost. Not my son. I realized with startling clarity that I'd lost him years ago, probably around the time he met Jennifer and her wealthy parents. No, what terrified me was the realization that I'd been blind to his transformation, making excuses for his behavior, attributing his coldness to stress or work pressure. Sarah, my late wife, would have seen it immediately. She had a way of reading people, of seeing through facades to the truth beneath. "Character isn't built in comfort, William," she used to say. "It's revealed in how we treat people when we think no one's watching." Marcus thought no one was watching tonight. He thought he could abandon his father on a dark highway and face no consequences. He was wrong about that, though he wouldn't know it for some time. 3 hours and 7 miles later, I finally saw the lights of a gas station. My feet were blistered inside my dress shoes, my knee swollen and throbbing, my jacket soaked with sweat despite the cold. The young attendant looked at me with concern as I limped through the door, probably thinking I was homeless or confused. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" she asked, her voice kind in a way that nearly broke me. I borrowed her phone to call a taxi, the fare home costing me $180, money I'd budgeted for groceries this month. During that long, expensive ride home, I made a decision. Marcus believed power came from titles and bank accounts, from the ability to hurt others without consequence. He was about to learn that real power comes from patience, from knowledge, and from understanding that every action has consequences, even if they don't appear immediately. When the taxi finally pulled up to my modest 2-story house at 2 in the morning, I wasn't surprised to see lights on inside. What did surprise me was seeing Jennifer's Mercedes in the driveway beside an unfamiliar Lincoln Town car. I paid the driver and walked to my own front door, finding it unlocked. Inside, Jennifer sat at my dining room table with her parents, Harold and Patricia, spreading financial documents across the surface where Sarah and I used to share Sunday dinners with young Marcus. "William," Jennifer said without looking up, her manicured fingers sorting through my papers. "We need to discuss your living situation. This house is obviously too much for you to maintain, and given tonight's confusion on the highway, we think it's time to consider assisted living options. The casual gaslighting, the invasion of my privacy, the assumption that they had any right to be here going through my things, it all confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment abandonment. This was planned, coordinated, designed to make me seem senile or incompetent. Harold, a man who'd made his fortune in real estate and never let anyone forget it, looked at me with false concern. "William," Marcus called us, very worried. "He said you became confused during the drive. Insisted on getting out of the car despite his protests. He's been driving around looking for you for hours." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that I realized they'd probably rehearsed it. Patricia chimed in with her practiced sympathy. "It's nothing to be ashamed of, William. Mental decline happens to many people your age. The important thing is getting you somewhere safe where you can be properly cared for." They'd already marked items in my home with colored stickers: green for keep, yellow for donate, red for sell. Sarah's piano, the one she'd played every evening, teaching Marcus his first songs, had a red sticker. The bookshelf I'd built with my own hands, filled with photo albums of our family history, yellow stickers on every shelf. I stood in my own doorway, muddy, exhausted, watching strangers categorize my life for disposal, and I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile or even a sad one. It was the smile of a man who'd just been handed perfect clarity about a situation he'd been too sentimental to see clearly before. "You're right," I said, my voice calm despite my exhaustion. "Things do need to change, but not tonight. I'm tired and you're trespassing. Please leave my home immediately or I'll call the police and report a break-in." Jennifer's face flushed with indignation. "Marcus gave us his key. We have every right to be here checking on his father's welfare." I pulled out my phone, the same ancient flip phone Marcus mocked, and began dialing. "Marcus doesn't live here and hasn't for 15 years. His name isn't on any deed or lease. You have 10 seconds to gather your things and leave." Or I explained to the police how I found strangers in my home at 2 a.m. going through my financial documents. They left quickly after that. Harold muttering about ungrateful old men, Patricia clutching her pearls, Jennifer promising this wasn't over. After they were gone, I locked the door and began removing every sticker they'd placed. Each red tag I pulled off felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. When I finally made it to my home office, I locked the door behind me and moved the filing cabinet, revealing the safe I'd installed 30 years ago. Inside were documents Jennifer and Marcus knew nothing about: deeds, incorporation papers, investment portfolios. I'd spent 40 years in construction, yes, but not just as a supervisor. I'd been buying distressed properties, renovating them with my crew on weekends, building a portfolio that would have shocked my son, who thought I was just a working-class nobody. The truth was, I could buy Marcus's BMW with cash and not feel it. I chose to live modestly because Sarah and I valued different things than material display. We valued security, family, and the quiet dignity of earning what you had. 3 weeks passed before I heard from Marcus again. He sent a text, not even a call, inviting me to his 35th birthday dinner at La Bernardin, the most expensive restaurant in the city. The message was curt. Birthday dinner Saturday, 7 p.m., dress appropriately. No apology for the highway incident, no acknowledgement of what had happened. I knew it was a trap of some sort, another humiliation planned, but I decided to attend. I had my own plans now, plans that had been forming since that night on the highway. I prepared carefully for the dinner, not just my clothes but my mind, steeling myself for whatever they'd prepared. In my jacket pocket, I placed an envelope that contained a gift Marcus didn't know he needed yet, though not the gift he'd ever expect. The restaurant was everything Marcus aspired to be: exclusive, expensive, and cold. I arrived to find a large table already occupied by Marcus, Jennifer, her parents, and several of Marcus's colleagues, including a striking woman in her 50s, who could only be Sandra Morrison, the regional vice president Marcus constantly mentioned. I was seated at the far end of the table, practically in exile, while Marcus held court at the center. Throughout the dinner, he regaled his audience with stories of his success, his vision for the company, his ambitious plans. Not once did he mention my role in his education, the double shifts I'd worked to pay for his MBA, the retirement savings I'd cashed out when he'd needed capital for his first investment. When Harold made a snide comment about my quaint career in construction, Marcus actually laughed. "Dad's from a different generation," he said, as if I wasn't sitting right there. They didn't understand vision or strategic thinking. "Just punch the clock and collect your check, right, Dad?" Sandra Morrison watched this exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. She'd been mostly quiet during dinner, observing rather than participating in the self-congratulatory atmosphere. When Marcus announced his latest acquisition, a vacation property in Lake Tahoe that he'd be developing into luxury condos, she asked thoughtful questions about environmental impact and community displacement that Marcus deflected with practiced corporate speak. I noticed her eyes narrow slightly at his answers, filing something away. When the cake came out and everyone sang, I pulled out my envelope, standing to give my toast. "To my son," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet table. "May you receive exactly what you deserve in life, no more and no less." The words hung in the air, their ambiguity making everyone uncomfortable. Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Thanks, Dad. You can just leave the card with the other gifts." I walked over to him slowly, my knee still bothering me from that night on the highway, and held out the envelope. "This needs to be opened privately," I said quietly. "It's important." Marcus took it with obvious irritation, shoving it into his jacket pocket without looking at it. "Sure, Dad. Hey, my driver can take you home. We're going to be here a while longer. Important people to network with, you understand." I understood perfectly. I'd been invited as a prop, someone to demonstrate that Marcus came from humble beginnings, making his success seem even more impressive. As I left, I heard Jennifer's tinkling laugh and her comment about sweet but simple old men. I wondered if she'd still be laughing when Marcus finally opened that envelope and found it empty except for a single photo, a screenshot of a dashcam video showing a BMW leaving an old man on a dark highway. The call came 3 days later at 6 in the morning, but it wasn't Marcus. "Mr. Chen, this is Sandra Morrison from Morrison Industries. I apologize for the early hour, but I need to discuss something urgent regarding your son." Her voice was professional, but tinged with something else. Disappointment, maybe, or confirmation of suspicions. "I've received some disturbing reports about Marcus's conduct, both professional and personal. Would you be available to meet with me today?" I agreed, curious about what had prompted this call. When I arrived at her office that afternoon, she gestured for me to sit and pulled out a folder. "Mr. Chen, I want to start by saying that I knew who you were before that dinner. You probably don't remember, but you built our company's first headquarters 22 years ago. I was just a junior executive then, but I remember you refusing to cut corners on the foundation despite pressure from our board to reduce costs. You said, 'A building is only as strong as what you can't see.' I've never forgotten that." She opened the folder, revealing printed emails, complaint forms, and most surprisingly, several still images from what was clearly dashcam footage. "Someone sent me these anonymously," she said, though her tone suggested she had her suspicions about the sender. They show Marcus abandoning you on Highway 101. The timestamp indicates you were out there for over 3 hours. There's also footage from the gas station where you arrived, clearly distressed. She paused, studying my face. But that's not why I called you here. I called because in the past 3 weeks, 5 of Marcus's subordinates have filed formal complaints. He's been falsifying expense reports, claiming personal purchases as business expenses, and taking credit for work he didn't do. The Tahoe property he bragged about? He's been charging the renovation to the company as client entertainment facilities. He's also been using his position to pressure junior employees into doing personal errands, threatening their jobs if they refuse. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Sandra showed me email after email where Marcus displayed not just poor leadership but actual cruelty. In one, he'd fired a single mother for being 5 minutes late due to a daycare emergency. In another, he'd berated an intern until they quit, calling them useless as my pathetic father. That one hit particularly hard, seeing my failure as a parent spelled out in corporate email. "Mr. Chen," Sandra said gently, "the William Chen who built our headquarters would never have raised a son like this." "What happened?" I considered my words carefully before responding. "Sometimes, Ms. Morrison, despite our best efforts, people choose to become who they want to be, rather than who we raised them to be. My wife died when Marcus was 15. I think I overcompensated, gave him too much, protected him from consequences. By the time I realized what he was becoming, it was too late to change course through gentle means." Sandra nodded slowly, then asked the question I'd been expecting. "The dash cam footage, you arranged for it to be sent, didn't you? The timestamp shows it was from a truck belonging to Chen Construction Associates. That's your brother's company, isn't it?" I met her gaze steadily. "My brother's truck was on that route that night, yes. If footage exists, I imagine someone thought you should see it." She smiled slightly. "Someone also made sure we received Marcus's expense reports going back 2 years, with helpful annotations showing which purchases were personal. Someone with intimate knowledge of his spending habits." We sat in silence for a moment, 2 people understanding each other perfectly without saying everything aloud. "What will happen to him?" I asked finally. Sandra's expression hardened. "Termination effective immediately. Criminal charges for embezzlement. His professional reputation will be destroyed. He'll never work in this industry again." She paused, then added, "I could potentially be persuaded to allow him to resign quietly, pay restitution, and avoid criminal charges, but I'd need a very good reason to show that mercy." I thought about it for a long moment, remembering the boy who'd once brought me breakfast in bed on Father's Day, who'd cried at his mother's funeral and promised to make her proud. Then I remembered the man who'd left me on a dark highway, who'd laughed at my career, who'd marked my life for disposal. "No," I said quietly. "He needs to face consequences, real ones. It's the only way he might learn." Sandra nodded, respecting my decision. "There's something else," she said, pulling out another document. "Your construction supervisor pension is rather modest, isn't it? We're looking for someone to consult on company culture and employee treatment as we expand. Someone with experience in building strong foundations, seen and unseen. The position pays very well, and would involve reviewing potential partnerships and acquisitions for cultural fit. Would you be interested?" That evening, Marcus arrived at my door at midnight, his face twisted with rage, Jennifer beside him clutching a termination letter. "What did you do?" he screamed, pounding on the door. "What did you tell them?" I opened the door calmly, security chain still in place. "I told them nothing but the truth when asked," I said evenly. "You, however, told them everything through your actions." His face went purple with fury. "You vindictive old man. You destroyed me because I hurt your feelings, because I told you some hard truths about your pathetic life." Jennifer chimed in, her voice shrill. "We'll sue you for defamation, for interference with employment. My father knows lawyers who will destroy you." I laughed then, a short, cold sound that made them both step back. "Your father knows real estate lawyers. I know criminal defense attorneys who owe me favors from construction projects I prioritized when they needed help. But more importantly, everything Sandra Morrison has is documented fact. Emails you wrote, expenses you filed, video footage from multiple sources." Marcus's rage suddenly shifted to desperation. "Dad, please. I'm sorry about the highway. I was stressed, I wasn't thinking clearly. You have to help me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I'm a good person who made mistakes." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. You left me on a highway, I said slowly. You conspired with your wife and her parents to have me declared incompetent. You've spent years mocking me, dismissing me, being ashamed of me, and now you want my help? He actually dropped to his knees then. Right there on my doorstep, his expensive suit getting dirty on the concrete. Please, Dad, I'll lose everything. The house, the cars, everything. Jennifer will leave me. I looked at Jennifer, whose face confirmed that yes, she would indeed leave him the moment the money disappeared. Then you'll learn what it feels like to have nothing but yourself, I said. And you'll discover if that's enough. I started to close the door, but Marcus's next words stopped me. Mom would be ashamed of you, he said viciously. Destroying your own son. She'd hate what you've become. That was his biggest mistake. I opened the door fully then, stepping out onto the porch, and Marcus scrambled backward. Your mother, I said, my voice deadly quiet, would be heartbroken by what you've become. She'd weep to see how you treat people, how you've weaponized success, how you abandoned every value she tried to teach you. Don't you dare invoke her name to manipulate me. She died believing you'd become a good man. Thank God she never had to see how wrong she was. The words hit him like physical blows, each one stripping away his bravado until he was just a man in an expensive suit crying on his father's porch. Over the next weeks, the full extent of Marcus's downfall became clear. The scandal made local news when the embezzlement charges were filed. The dashcam footage went viral after someone leaked it to social media with the caption, Executive abandons elderly father on highway, karma follows. His colleagues distanced themselves immediately. Jennifer filed for divorce within a week, claiming she'd been deceived about his character. Her parents, Harold and Patricia, showed up at my door trying to threaten me into helping, as they'd co-signed loans based on Marcus's expected income. I served them tea in Sarah's china, the set they'd marked for sale, and showed them my own financial documents, the properties I owned, the construction company I'd built, the investment portfolio worth more than their combined assets. You thought I was a nobody, I said calmly, a working-class embarrassment to be disposed of. You never asked how a construction supervisor could afford to pay for an MBA from Wharton, or how I could give Marcus the down payment for his first house. You saw what you wanted to see, someone beneath you, and you taught my son to see me the same way. Patricia actually cried then, not from shame but from the realization that they'd alienated someone who could have helped them. Harold blustered about lawsuits until I mentioned that I had recorded every conversation in my home since they'd broken in that night, all legal in a one-party consent state. They left defeated, their Lincoln Town car looking less impressive as it drove away. The truth was, I could have helped them. I could have paid off Marcus's debts, saved his house, kept him from complete ruin. But that would have taught him nothing. He needed to fall all the way to the bottom to understand what he'd become and decide if he wanted to change. The house Marcus had been so proud of went into foreclosure. The BMW was repossessed. The Tahoe property was seized for debt. Jennifer took what little remained in the divorce, including the watch I'd given him for his college graduation. Within 3 months, Marcus had gone from regional director to unemployable pariah. His name was toxic in the industry. No one would hire someone who'd abandoned his elderly father and embezzled from his company. I kept tabs on him through various sources, learning he'd moved into a studio apartment in a rough part of town, taking whatever work he could find. Part of me wanted to reach out to offer help, but I knew that would be the worst thing I could do. He needed to sit in the consequences of his choices, to understand what life felt like without the cushion of privilege he'd taken for granted. 6 months after his termination, I received an unexpected visitor. Sandra Morrison arrived at my door on a Sunday morning with a box of pastries and a proposal. William, I've been thinking about Marcus, she said, settling into my living room. I've seen the reports. He's working night shifts at a warehouse, living in conditions that must be humbling for someone who was dining at Le Bernardin not long ago. I waited, knowing she had more to say. I've also been monitoring something else. He's been sending small amounts of money to Jennifer's parents, trying to help with their losses even though he has no legal obligation. He's volunteering at a food bank on weekends. He's attending therapy. These could be performative gestures, but they could also be genuine attempts at change. She pulled out a letter, handwritten on simple paper. He wrote to me, she said, not asking for his job back, not making excuses, just apologizing for his behavior and thanking me for showing him who he'd become before it was too late to change. I read the letter slowly. It was different from Marcus's usual communication. No corporate speak, no manipulation. Just raw honesty about his failures and his commitment to becoming better. "What do you think?" Sandra asked. "Do you believe people can change?" I thought about Sarah, how she'd always believed in redemption, in second chances. "I believe people can change," I said finally. "But only when they choose it for themselves, not when it's chosen for them. Marcus needs to rebuild himself from nothing. If he can do that, maybe there's hope." A year after the highway incident, a letter arrived with no return address. Inside was a check for $500 and a note. "For the taxi. I know it doesn't cover everything I cost you, but it's a start. May." I held that check for a long time, remembering the boy who'd once saved his allowance for months to buy me a Father's Day gift. The amount represented probably a week's wages at his warehouse job. I didn't cash it. Instead, I put it in Sarah's piano bench, next to our wedding photo and Marcus's first report card. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take much more time and evidence of real change. But it was acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the son I'd raised was still in there somewhere, fighting to resurface through the layers of ambition and cruelty that had buried him. Sandra and I developed an unexpected friendship through our consulting work. She'd been right about my value to the company, not for my construction knowledge, but for my ability to read people, to see through the facades that fooled others. We reviewed dozens of potential partnerships, and I helped her avoid 3 deals that would have been disasters based on the character of the leadership involved. She paid me well, but more importantly, she respected me in a way Marcus never had. During one of our working lunches, she asked about him. "Any contact?" I shook my head. "Just the check. I think he needs to figure out who he is without me, without my approval or disapproval shaping his choices." She nodded thoughtfully. "You know, William, what you did took incredible strength. Most parents would have enabled, excused, covered up. You chose the harder path." I thought about that often, wondering if I'd been too harsh, if Sarah would have approved of my methods. 2 years passed. I heard through various sources that Marcus had been promoted to supervisor at the warehouse, that he'd moved to a better apartment, that he was taking night classes in counseling. He'd kept Jennifer's last name in the divorce, professionally going by Marcus Richardson instead of Marcus Chen. I understood why. The Chen name was associated with the scandal. But part of me wondered if it was also his way of separating from me entirely, creating a new identity free from our connection. Then one day I saw him at Sarah's grave. I'd gone to place flowers on her birthday and found him there, kneeling by her headstone, talking quietly. I stayed hidden behind a tree, watching. He looked different, thinner but healthier, his expensive clothes replaced by simple work attire. He was crying, apologizing to her, promising to become someone she'd recognize again. After he left, I approached the grave and found he'd left a letter addressed to me, placed under a rock.
"Dad," it read, "I know you come here on her birthday."
"I wanted you to know that I come here too, on the anniversary of the day I left you on that highway. I tell her what I did. I tell her who I became. I tell her how ashamed I am. I don't expect forgiveness from you or from her. I just wanted you to know that I remember, and I'm trying to be better. Your son, if I can still call myself that. Marcus." I sat by Sarah's grave for a long time after reading that, talking to her about forgiveness and justice, about parenting and failure, about the possibility of redemption. I could almost hear her voice, gentle but firm. "People can change, William, but they have to want it more than they want anything else." 3 years after the highway incident, I received another letter. This one had a return address, Portland, Oregon. Inside was a photo of Marcus with a woman, both wearing volunteer t-shirts at what looked like a senior center. "Dad," the letter began, "I wanted you to know I'm okay. I'm working as a counselor at a treatment center, using my MBA in a different way than I ever imagined. This is Amy. She's a social worker I met volunteering. She knows everything about my past. I told her on our 3rd date, expecting her to run. She said anyone who can face their worst self honestly has a chance at becoming their best self. We're getting married next month. It will be small, just a few friends. I'm not inviting you because I don't think I have the right to ask for your presence at a celebration, but I wanted you to know that I'm building something real this time. Not just impressive. I'm building it slowly, carefully, making sure the foundation is strong. I remembered what you used to say about construction. It's not about how tall you build, but how solid the base is. I'm working on my base. Your son, Marcus. I stared at that photo for hours, seeing something in Marcus's face I hadn't seen in years. Genuine happiness. Not the sharp-edged satisfaction of success, but the quiet contentment of someone who'd found their way. Amy looked kind, with an open face and warm smile. They looked good together, like equals rather than the power couple Marcus and Jennifer had tried to be. I wrote back just a short note. Your mother would like Amy, be good to her. Build something that lasts. I didn't sign it Dad, I wasn't ready for that yet. But I didn't sign it William either. I just signed it W, leaving room for possibility. 5 years after that night on the highway, everything changed with a single phone call. Mr. Chen, this is Amy Richardson, Marcus's wife. I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but I'm pregnant. And Marcus doesn't know I'm calling you. He talks about you all the time, about the mistakes he made, about the man you tried to raise him to be. He's different now, truly different. The man who left you on that highway doesn't exist anymore. The man I married would give a stranger his last dollar, works overtime to help co-workers, spends weekends teaching job skills to recovering addicts. I know he hurt you terribly. I know forgiveness might be impossible, but I wanted you to know you're going to be a grandfather, and this child deserves to know where they come from, including the hard parts. Marcus is in therapy, working through his shame and guilt. His therapist says he needs to forgive himself, but he says he can't until he knows you're okay, that he didn't destroy your life with his cruelty. I sat in silence for a long moment before responding. Tell me about him, I said. Not the good things he does, not his job. Tell me about the small moments when no one's watching. Amy understood immediately. She told me about finding him crying over my photo, about him keeping my old construction helmet in their closet, about him refusing to drive on Highway 101 even when it would save time. She told me about him teaching elderly residents at the center how to use computers patient and kind in a way that would have been unimaginable from the regional director version of Marcus. She told me about him working with young men in the treatment center who reminded him of himself, warning them about the cost of ambition without compassion. He's not perfect, she said finally. He still struggles with pride sometimes, with wanting to be important. But he catches himself now, apologizes, corrects course. He's doing the work. After the call, I drove to Portland, not to see Marcus, just to observe. I watched him from across the street as he helped an elderly woman with her groceries. I sat in the back of a community meeting where he spoke about redemption and accountability. I saw him with Amy, the way he looked at her, the gentle way he touched her growing belly. This wasn't performance, he didn't know I was there. This was who he'd become. That night I made a decision. I wrote 2 documents. The first was a will leaving my estate to various charities. The second was a trust for my grandchild's education, with one condition. They must work in service, construction, healthcare, teaching, something that serves others, for 2 years before accessing it. I sent Marcus a single line. I'll meet Amy and the child when it's born. We'll start there. 6 months later, I stood in a hospital room in Portland holding my granddaughter for the first time. Marcus stood across from me, tears streaming down his face. Her name is Sarah, he said quietly. Sarah William Richardson. We wanted her to carry both of you with her. I looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time in 5 years. He was different. Not just older, but weathered in a good way, like wood that's been seasoned properly. The sharp edges were gone, replaced by something more solid. She's beautiful, I said. And then, after a long pause, you did good, son. The word son hung in the air between us, a bridge we were both afraid to cross completely. Amy took the baby, giving us a moment. Marcus and I stood there, 2 men who'd hurt each other deeply, trying to find our way back to something resembling family. I dream about that highway, Marcus said suddenly. Every night. I see your face in the headlights as I drive away. I wake up trying to turn the car around, but in the dream I never can. I considered my words carefully. I dream about it too, I admitted. But in my dreams, I'm not on the highway. I'm watching from above, seeing both of us, understanding that we both needed that moment. You needed to hit bottom. I needed to stop enabling. That highway was where we both started becoming who we needed to be. Marcus nodded, understanding that this wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something, acknowledgement perhaps, or the beginning of acceptance. Over the following months, I visited monthly, always to see Sarah, slowly rebuilding something with Marcus and Amy. We didn't talk about the past much, focusing instead on the present. Marcus showed me his work at the treatment center, introduced me to his colleagues who spoke of him with genuine respect. One, an older man named James, pulled me aside. "Your son saved my life," he said simply. I was ready to give up, and he sat with me all night, telling me about failure and redemption, about losing everything and finding yourself in the ruins. He told me about you, about the father who loved him enough to let him fall. You raised a good man, even if it took him a while to become one. During one visit, Marcus asked if he could show me something. He drove us to a construction site where they were building affordable housing. "I volunteer here on weekends," he said. "I remembered all those times you took me to your sites as a kid. I'm learning to build things with my hands, not just spreadsheets and presentations. The foreman says I'm getting good at it." We stood there watching the workers, and I found myself explaining techniques, teaching him things I'd tried to teach him 20 years ago when he was too ambitious to listen. Now he absorbed every word, asking questions, taking notes. It was like teaching a stranger who happened to look like my son. But gradually, visit by visit, that stranger was becoming familiar again. Sarah grew quickly, a happy child with her grandmother's smile and her grandfather's stubborn streak. She called me Pop Pop, a name that made me smile every time. Marcus and Amy were good parents, patient and present in a way that gave me hope. They lived simply, even though Marcus had been promoted to director of the treatment center. "I learned what happens when you live for appearances," he told me once. "Now we live for substance." I watched him with other parents at Sarah's daycare, helpful and humble, no trace of the arrogance that had once defined him. He'd mention me sometimes, I learned from Amy, telling people about his father, the master builder, the man who understood foundations. One day, Marcus called with unexpected news. "Dad, Jennifer's parents are in trouble. Harold had a stroke and they're facing medical bankruptcy." Patricia reached out, desperate. "I know what they did to you, how they treated you, but they're old and scared. I wanted to help them, but I wanted to ask you first." The fact that he asked, that he considered my feelings while still wanting to help people who'd wronged us both, showed me how far he'd come. "It's your decision," I said. "But helping people who hurt you when you have the power not to, that's what your mother would do." He helped them quietly, without making them grovel or beg. Patricia sent me a letter afterward, a real apology this time, acknowledging their prejudice and cruelty. I didn't respond, but I didn't tear it up either. As Sarah's second birthday approached, Marcus asked if I wanted to help plan the party. We spent a day together, just the two of us, shopping for decorations and cake. In the car between stops, he suddenly pulled over. For a moment, my body tensed, remembering another time he'd pulled over. But this time he turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I need to say this properly. I'm sorry. Not just sorry for the highway, but for the years before it. For the contempt, the dismissal, the cruelty. For letting success poison me. For forgetting everything you and Mom taught me. For becoming someone who could abandon his father on a dark road. I'm sorry for all of it, and I know sorry isn't enough, but I need you to hear it." I sat quietly for a moment, then reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "I hear it," I said, "and I see who you've become. That matters more than who you were." The birthday party was perfect, simple and warm in a way Marcus's 35th birthday hadn't been. Friends from the treatment center, colleagues from Amy's work, neighbors from their modest apartment complex. No one trying to impress anyone, just people celebrating a little girl who giggled with delight at her grandfather's funny faces. Sandra Morrison came, having stayed in touch all these years. She pulled me aside during the party. "You did the right thing," she said. "Letting him fall. Looking at him now, seeing who he's become. You gave him a gift by not saving him from himself." I watched Marcus playing with Sarah, patient and present, and thought about second chances and third chances and the long road between who we are and who we can become. That night, after everyone had gone home and Sarah was asleep, Marcus and I sat on his small balcony looking at the stars. "I've been thinking about buying a house," he said. "Nothing fancy, just something with a yard for Sarah. There's one for sale near that highway, actually. Near where it happened. Every time I pass it, I think about that night, about how that was where my old life ended and my real life began. Is that crazy?" I thought about it, about the symbolism of building something new near the site of our mutual destruction and rebirth. "Not crazy," I said. "Sometimes you need to face your worst moments to move past them. But Marcus, you don't need to punish yourself forever. What happened on that highway led us both to better places, even if the journey was painful." He nodded, then asked something that surprised me. Would you help me renovate it? If I buy it, I mean. Teach me to build something solid, something that will last? The request hung between us, an invitation to create something together after years of destruction. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. We started the project 2 months later, working weekends while Amy and Sarah cheered us on. Marcus learned quickly, his hands becoming steady and sure with tools he'd once thought beneath him. We talked while we worked, not about the past, but about building, about craftsmanship, about creating something worthwhile. Neighbors would stop by and Marcus would introduce me proudly. This is my dad. He's teaching me to build things right. The house became beautiful under our hands, not flashy but solid, warm, welcoming. The day they moved in, Marcus hung a sign he'd made in woodworking class, built on strong foundations. That evening, as we celebrated with takeout pizza in our new living room, Sarah toddled over to me with a book. Pop, read, she demanded, climbing into my lap. As I read to her, I caught Marcus watching us, his expression soft. Later, as I prepared to leave, he walked me to my car. Dad, he said, I love you. I forgot that for a while. Buried it under ambition and pride, but it was always there. Thank you for waiting for me to remember. I hugged him then, my son, this man who'd traveled so far from who he'd been to who he'd become. I love you too, I said. Both who you are now and who you're still becoming. Driving home that night, I passed the spot on Highway 101 where everything had changed. I'd driven this route hundreds of times since that night, but this time felt different. This time I pulled over at the same spot where Marcus had left me. I got out and stood on the shoulder, not in fear or anger, but in something like gratitude. That night of abandonment had been the catalyst for both our transformations. Marcus had needed to lose everything to find himself. I had needed to stop enabling and start teaching through consequences. The highway that had once seemed like the site of our relationship's death had become the place where it was reborn, stronger because it had been tested and rebuilt rather than simply maintained. Today, 3 more years have passed since that night in the hospital when I first held Sarah. Marcus and Amy have given her a brother, William Marcus Richardson, whom they call Liam. Marcus runs the treatment center with compassion and wisdom, helping others find their way back from their own highways of despair. We have dinner together every Sunday, a tradition that would have seemed impossible during those dark years. He still struggles sometimes with the weight of what he did, the person he was. During those moments, I remind him that redemption isn't a destination, but a daily choice, and he's been making the right choice every day for years now. Amy tells me he's the best man she knows, and while I might be biased, I'm starting to agree with her. Jennifer remarried, someone Harold and Patricia found for her, another executive who values appearances over substance. I heard she drives past Marcus's modest house sometimes, perhaps wondering what might have been if she'd valued the man over the money. Marcus doesn't speak of her with bitterness, just sadness for someone who never learned what really matters. She gave me the push I needed to lose everything, he said once. In a way, I should thank her. The ability to find gratitude even in betrayal shows how far he's come from the man who raged at my door, demanding I fix his mistakes. Sandra Morrison became a close friend, someone who knew our whole story and celebrated our healing. She hired several people from Marcus's treatment center, giving them second chances based on his recommendation. Your son has become quite the judge of character, she told me recently. He sees through facades now, recognizes genuine change versus performance. He learned that from you eventually. She's retiring next year and asked if I'd consider taking over more responsibilities. I'm thinking about it, but honestly, I'm more interested in spending time with my grandchildren, teaching them to build things with their hands, to value substance over style, to understand that true strength comes from admitting weakness and choosing to grow. The other day, Sarah asked me why her daddy sometimes cries when he sees me. Children see everything, understand more than we think, I told her. Sometimes people cry when they're happy that something broken got fixed. She seemed satisfied with that answer, but Marcus overheard and came to sit beside me. Is it fixed, Dad? Really? He asked quietly. I thought about it, about the scars we both carry, about trust rebuilt slowly over years rather than assumed by birthright. Not fixed, I said finally. Rebuilt. Stronger in some places, still tender in others, but standing solid. He nodded, understanding that some things can't be undone, only transformed into something new. Last month, I updated my will. The charity donations remain, but I've added provisions for Marcus and his family. Not the fortune he once expected, but enough to ensure security. More importantly, I've written letters for Sarah and Liam to receive when they're older, telling them the whole story, the good and bad, the fall and redemption. I want them to understand that people are complex, that love sometimes means letting someone fail, that redemption is possible but must be earned. I want them to know their father as both the man who abandoned me on a highway and the man who rebuilt himself into someone worthy of respect. Both versions are true, both are part of their history, and understanding both will help them navigate their own moments of moral testing. This morning, I stood in my workshop, where Marcus helped me build in my backyard, looking at a photo from Sarah's recent birthday. 4 generations in one picture, me, Marcus, Sarah, and a photo of Sarah's namesake on my plate that Amy insisted we include. We look happy, genuinely happy. Not the performed happiness of Marcus's old life, but the quiet contentment of people who've been through hell together and chosen to climb out rather than remain in the pit. Marcus has his arm around me in the photo, natural and easy. No tension or performance. You'd never know looking at it, the journey we took to get to that moment. But we know. And that knowledge makes the happiness deeper, more precious because we understand its cost. People sometimes ask me if I forgive Marcus for that night on the highway. The question always makes me pause because forgiveness seems too simple a word for what we've built. I don't forget that night. Neither of us do. It lives between us, not as a wound, but as a reminder of what we're capable of, both the cruelty and the redemption. I've forgiven the son who left me there, but more importantly, I've embraced the man who emerged from that darkness. They're the same person and completely different, a paradox that makes perfect sense if you've ever watched someone truly change. The highway didn't break us. It broke what needed breaking so something better could be built. Tomorrow, Marcus and I are starting a new project. Building a playhouse for Sarah and Liam, something elaborate with multiple rooms and real windows. He's taken a week off work to focus on it, saying it's important to him that we build it together. I want them to have something their dad and grandfather made, he said. Something that will last. As we planned it out, he suggested adding a small plaque. Built by Pop and Dad, with love and strong foundations. I agreed, though I suggested we add the date. Not just when we built it, but how many years after that night on the highway? 8 years after everything changed, Marcus said, understanding immediately. 8 years after we both started becoming who we really are. Sometimes I drive that stretch of Highway 101 at night, when it's dark and quiet like it was that night Marcus left me there. I don't feel anger anymore or even sadness. Instead, I feel a strange gratitude for the worst night of my life. Because it led to everything that came after, the pain, yes, but also the growth, the redemption, the rebuilt relationship that's stronger for having been tested. I think about Sarah, my late wife, and how she always said that people need room to fail and room to grow. I gave Marcus both, even when it nearly killed me to watch him fall. He gave himself the harder gift, the humility to change, to admit fault, to rebuild from nothing. Together, we've created something neither of us could have imagined that night on the highway. A real relationship, built on truth rather than obligation, respect rather than assumption, love that's been tested and proven rather than simply claimed. This is our story, mine and Marcus's, but also Sarah's and Amy's and little Sarah's and Liam's. It's a story about the price of pride and the cost of redemption. It's about learning that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone face consequences, and the greatest act of courage is admitting you were wrong and doing the work to change. It's about understanding that family isn't just blood or obligation, but choice, daily choices to show up, to be present, to build something worth having. Marcus chose poorly for years, then chose better. I chose harsh medicine when gentle remedies had failed, then chose to remain open to reconciliation when it would have been easier to close that door forever. If you're watching this from somewhere where family relationships are strained, where someone has hurt you, or where you've hurt someone else, know that change is possible but not guaranteed. It requires genuine remorse, not just regret at consequences. It requires consistent action, not just words. It requires time, sometimes years, to rebuild what was destroyed in moments. But it's possible. Marcus and I are living proof that even the worst betrayal can become the foundation for something better, stronger, more real than what existed before. The highway that divided us became the road that led us back to each other. Different but better, scarred but whole. The sun is setting now as I finish writing this, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Marcus just texted asking if I want to come for dinner tonight. Amy's making your favorite, and Sarah has a new book she wants Pop to read. Such a simple message, but it carries the weight of years of rebuilding, of choosing family over pride, of learning that love isn't just a feeling but an action, repeated daily, especially when it's hard. I'll go, of course. I'll read to Sarah, help Liam with his blocks, talk with Amy about her work, and sit with Marcus in comfortable silence that speaks louder than words. We'll be a family, not perfect but present, not without history but not defined by it either. That night on Highway 101, Marcus drove away from more than just his father. He drove away from his last chance at easy redemption. By leaving me there, he set in motion a chain of events that would strip him of everything he thought mattered and teach him what actually did. I walked in darkness that night, terrified and exhausted, not knowing that I was walking toward a future where my son would know himself, where my grandchildren would know their grandfather, where forgiveness would be earned rather than assumed. The promotion was revoked, yes, but so much more was revoked. Pretense, arrogance, the hollow success built on cruelty. What replaced it was real, substantial, worth having. Marcus grovelled, yes, but more importantly, he grew. And in growing, he became the son Sarah always believed he could be. Just taking a longer, harder road to get there than any of us expected. If you've found value in this story, if it's made you think about your own relationships or the power of consequences and redemption, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether you believe people can truly change. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about families, forgiveness, and the long journey from who we are to who we can become. Remember, sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations, and sometimes being left behind is the first step toward finding your way forward. Thank you for joining me on this journey from that dark highway to this moment of hope and healing.